I'll never forget the moment Tyler Brooks, my brother's best man, stood there in his designer tuxedo, holding the keys to his brand new Tesla, asking me with genuine confusion where exactly the parking lot owner should put his car, since all the premium spots were apparently reserved. The same parking lot where 30 minutes earlier, I'd been forced to hand over $50 just to attend my own brother's wedding. The look of absolute bewilderment that washed over Marcus's face when I calmly replied that he was talking to her was worth every single rejection, every dismissive comment, and every family gathering where I'd been treated like the disappointment who couldn't figure out how to be successful like everyone else. But let me tell you how a family that spent years treating me like I was wasting my life accidentally made me the most successful person at that wedding reception. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and growing up in the Rodriguez household in South Austin meant understanding your place in the family hierarchy from a very young age. There was Marcus, 3 years older than me, who seemed to excel at everything he touched without even trying. Honor roll student, varsity football captain, debate team champion, and basically the golden child who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Then there was me, the daughter who spent too much time on her laptop, asked too many questions about why things had to be done a certain way, and somehow never quite measured up to the Rodriguez family standards of success. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't some rebellious teenager causing drama just for the sake of it. I was actually a pretty good student myself, maintained a solid GPA, and even got accepted to UT Austin for communication. But in a family where my father Roberto had built Rodriguez Construction from nothing into one of Austin's most respected contracting companies, and where my mother Carmen managed the business side with an iron fist, academic achievements felt secondary to understanding how the real world actually worked. At least, that's what they kept telling me. The Rodriguez family dinners were legendary in our neighborhood, not because of my mom's incredible cooking, though her tamales could bring grown men to tears, but because of the intense business discussions that dominated every single meal. While other families talked about school events or weekend plans, our dinner table was basically a boardroom where construction projects, client relationships, and market conditions were dissected with surgical precision. Marcus absorbed every word like he was preparing for a final exam, asking intelligent questions about profit margins and contractor relationships that made my parents beam with pride. I, on the other hand, found myself increasingly fascinated by the marketing side of things. How did successful companies actually reach their customers? Why did some businesses thrive while others with better products failed miserably? What role did digital presence play in modern business success? These questions seemed less important to my family than understanding the difference between residential and commercial building codes. But they consumed my thoughts in ways that traditional business operations never did. Marcus and I couldn't have been more different in our approaches to life. He was methodical, following a clear path that everyone could understand and approve of. High school graduation with valedictorian honors, full scholarship to study business at UT, then straight to Harvard for his MBA. Every step was calculated, predictable, and absolutely guaranteed to make our parents proud. He had this way of making everything look effortless, whether it was acing a calculus exam or charming potential clients at company barbecue. Meanwhile, I was the one asking why we couldn't create a website for Rodriguez Construction that actually showcased our work effectively, or suggesting that social media marketing might help us reach younger homeowners who were driving most of the residential renovation market in Austin. These ideas were usually met with polite smiles and comments about how I should focus on my studies instead of trying to fix things that weren't broken. The thing is, I wasn't trying to be difficult or prove anyone wrong. I genuinely saw opportunities that everyone else seemed to be missing. Austin was changing rapidly during my teenage years, transforming from a laid-back college town into a major tech hub, and I could see how businesses that adapted to digital marketing were absolutely crushing their competition. But suggesting that a construction company needed to think about Instagram presence or Google reviews was apparently too radical for the Rodriguez family business philosophy. By my sophomore year at UT, I was spending more time learning about digital marketing, web development, and social media strategy than I was focusing on my communications coursework. Not because I was failing my classes, but because I could see that the skills I was teaching myself online were going to be far more valuable than anything I was learning in lecture halls. I started freelancing for small local businesses, helping them create social media content and basic websites. And honestly, I was making more money doing that part-time than most of my classmates were making at their campus job. My parents' reaction to my entrepreneurial activities was a mixture of confusion and mild disapproval. They couldn't understand why I was wasting time on computer stuff when I should be focusing on getting my degree and then finding a stable job with benefits and a retirement plan. The fact that I was actually earning money doing this computer stuff didn't seem to register as legitimate business activity in their minds. It was more like an extended hobby that was distracting me from real career preparation. Marcus, to his credit, never actively put me down, but he also never really took my business ideas seriously. He had this way of listening politely when I talked about digital marketing strategies, or explained how e-commerce was revolutionizing retail, then changing the subject to something he considered more substantial, like his internship at Goldman Sachs or his plans for business school. It wasn't malicious, but it was clear that he saw my interests as cute distractions rather than serious career preparation. The breaking point came during my junior year when I landed a client who was willing to pay me $15,000 to completely overhaul their online presence and create a comprehensive digital marketing strategy. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life, and it represented validation that my skills had real market value. I was so excited to share the news with my family, thinking finally they'd understand that what I was doing wasn't just a hobby. The reaction was not what I expected. My father's first question was whether this was legal and if I was paying taxes properly. My mother wanted to know why I was spending so much time on work that took me away from my studies. Marcus asked if I thought it was wise to take on such a big responsibility when I didn't have a business degree or any formal training in marketing. The underlying message was clear: even when I succeeded, they couldn't quite believe it was sustainable or worth. That conversation planted a seed of determination in my mind that would grow into something much larger over the next few years. I realized that no matter how successful I became with digital marketing, my family would always see it as less legitimate than traditional business success. They needed to see results they could understand and respect, which meant I needed to think bigger than just service-based freelancing. During my senior year, I made a decision that shocked everyone, including myself. I dropped out of college with only one semester left to complete my degree, and used the money I'd saved from freelancing to start Elevate Digital Marketing Agency. Not just me working alone from my dorm room, but a real company with an office, employees, and the kind of business structure that even my parents couldn't dismiss as a hobby. The first year was absolutely brutal. I was working 18-hour days, learning how to manage employees, handle client contracts, and run a legitimate business while still trying to prove that I hadn't made a massive mistake by leaving school. My parents were politely supportive, but clearly worried that I was ruining my future over what they saw as an impulsive decision. Marcus had graduated from Harvard by then and landed his dream job at Goldman Sachs, making the contrast between our choices even more stark. But something interesting happened during that first year of struggle. I discovered that I had a natural talent for understanding what businesses actually needed to succeed in the digital age. And more importantly, I could deliver results that directly impacted their bottom line. My client base grew through word-of-mouth referrals, and I started landing contracts with companies that had marketing budgets larger than most people's annual salaries. By year 2, Elevate Digital Marketing Agency had 15 employees, and was generating revenue that put us in the top tier of Austin's growing marketing sector. We weren't just creating websites and managing social media accounts anymore. We were developing comprehensive digital strategies that were transforming how local businesses reached their customers. I had clients who credited our work with doubling their revenue within 6 months of implementing our recommendations. The success was gratifying, but it also highlighted the gap between my family's understanding of business and the reality of what I was building. They could see that I was making money and hiring people, which registered as legitimate business activity, but they still didn't quite grasp how substantial the company was becoming. When I moved into a converted warehouse space in East Austin and installed a full production studio for content creation, my father's main comment was about the lease terms and whether I was overextending myself financially. Marcus, meanwhile, was making his own mark in the finance world. His Harvard MBA and Goldman Sachs pedigree opened doors that led to increasingly prestigious positions, and he had this way of networking that made everything look effortless. He was the kind of person who could walk into any room and immediately command respect based on his credentials and polished presentation. Family gatherings became showcases for his latest professional achievements, with aunts and uncles asking detailed questions about his work and nodding approvingly at his explanations of investment strategies and market analysis. I was proud of my brother's success, genuinely, but I also felt increasingly invisible during these family events. When relatives asked about my business, the conversations were shorter and less enthusiastic. Digital marketing wasn't something most of my extended family understood or found particularly impressive, even when I tried to explain the scope of what we were accomplishing. It felt like being fluent in a language that no one else spoke, constantly translating my achievements into terms that might resonate but never quite capturing the full picture. The dynamic became even more pronounced when Marcus started dating Ashley Chen, an interior designer who came from a family with similarly traditional views about career success. Ashley was lovely, intelligent, and accomplished in her own right, but she also had this way of asking about my business that made it clear she saw it as something unconventional and potentially unstable. Her questions were always polite, but carried an undertone of concern, as if she was trying to understand how someone could build a career on something as intangible as internet marketing. As Marcus and Ashley's relationship became more serious, family gatherings started revolving around their milestones and future plans. Their engagement announcement was a major family celebration, with everyone discussing wedding plans, career trajectories, and the kind of stable, successful life they were building together. I was genuinely happy for them, but I also felt like I was watching from the sidelines as everyone celebrated a version of success that looked nothing like what I was creating. The engagement period was when I really started to understand how differently my family viewed our respective achievements. Marcus's promotion to senior analyst was treated as a major family victory, with my parents hosting a dinner party to celebrate. When I landed a contract with one of Austin's largest tech companies that would triple our annual revenue, the reaction was more muted. Congratulations were offered, but there wasn't the same sense of pride or excitement. It was as if my success existed in a parallel universe that didn't quite intersect with their understanding of what mattered. That's when I started thinking seriously about real estate investment, not just as a way to diversify my income, but as a way to build wealth that my family would recognize and respect. Digital marketing might be invisible to them, but property ownership was something that aligned with their understanding of business success. My father had built his construction company partly through strategic real estate investments, buying properties that needed renovation and then using his crew to increase. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Their value before selling or renting them out. I started researching Austin's commercial real estate market with the same intensity I'd applied to learning digital marketing. I studied development patterns, zoning regulations, and traffic flow data. I analyzed which neighborhoods were positioned for growth and what types of properties were likely to appreciate most rapidly. Most importantly, I started building relationships with commercial real estate brokers and learning how to evaluate investment opportunities with the kind of analytical rigor that would impress even my MBA-educated brother. The timing was perfect because Austin's growth was accelerating rapidly. The tech industry was bringing thousands of new residents to the city every year, and the downtown area was expanding outward into previously overlooked neighborhoods. East Austin, in particular, was transforming from an affordable arts district into one of the most desirable areas in the city. Property values were climbing monthly, and smart investors were making fortunes by getting in early on the right parcels. That's when I discovered the parking lot on the corner of 6th Street and Colorado River Boulevard. It wasn't much to look at, just a gravel lot surrounded by chain-link fencing, but its location was absolutely perfect. The lot sat right at the intersection of downtown Austin and the emerging East Side Entertainment District, within walking distance of some of the city's most popular venues and restaurants. During events at the nearby convention center or major concerts, that little parking lot generated more revenue per square foot than some retail establishment. The owner was an elderly man named Frank Patterson who'd inherited the property from his father, and had been using it as a parking lot for over 20 years. Frank was getting tired of managing the day-to-day operations and dealing with the constant request from developers who wanted to buy the land for high-rise construction. He wasn't actively trying to sell, but he was open to the right offer from someone who appreciated what the property represented. I spent weeks researching comparable sales, analyzing the lot's revenue potential, and developing a business plan that would convince any bank to finance the purchase. The numbers were compelling. Even as just a parking lot, the property was generating steady income with minimal overhead, but the real value was in its development potential. That corner was destined to become extremely valuable as Austin continued growing, and whoever owned it would have options that most investors could only dream about. The purchase process took 3 months to complete, partly because I wanted to structure the deal through a holding company that wouldn't immediately reveal my identity, and partly because I was savoring the anticipation of what this investment represented. For the first time since starting my business, I was making a move that my family would not only understand but respect. Property ownership was something they valued, and prime commercial real estate in a rapidly growing city was exactly the kind of investment that demonstrated serious business acumen. I decided to keep the purchase private until the right moment presented itself. There was something satisfying about knowing that while my family was politely tolerating my digital marketing success, I was quietly building wealth in ways they'd find genuinely impressive. The parking lot became my secret advantage, generating steady income while I continued growing, Elevate digital marketing agency, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to reveal just how well my unconventional career path was actually working out. That opportunity came sooner than I expected, in the form of Marcus and Ashley's wedding announcement, and their decision to hold the reception at the Riverside Manor, one of Austin's most prestigious event venues. The same venue that was located exactly 4 blocks from my newly acquired parking lot, right in the heart of the area that was about to become the center of attention for 200 wedding guests who would need somewhere to park their cars. The months leading up to Marcus and Ashley's engagement party revealed just how differently our family measured success. Ashley had this way of including me in wedding conversations that felt generous on the surface, but carried undertones that made me increasingly aware of my outsider status. She would ask for my opinion on venue lighting or floral arrangements, then pivot to discussing the more important details with our mother, as if my input was appreciated but not quite substantial enough to influence major decisions. During one particularly memorable family dinner, Ashley mentioned that she was struggling to create a cohesive social media presence for their wedding. She wanted something elegant and sophisticated that would showcase their relationship and the beautiful venues they were considering, but her attempts at Instagram stories and wedding hashtags felt amateurish compared to what she saw other couples creating. This was literally exactly what my company specialized in, and I immediately offered to help design a comprehensive digital strategy that would make their wedding social media presence absolutely stunning. The offer was met with the kind of polite enthusiasm that I'd learned to recognize as family code for "that's nice, but we'll handle it ourselves." Ashley thanked me profusely and said she might take me up on that, but then spent the next 20 minutes explaining how her maid of honor Rachel was a lifestyle blogger with experience in social media, so they would probably just work together on creating content that felt authentic and personal rather than overly professional. I sat there listening to Ashley describe her social media challenges, knowing that my team could solve every single problem she mentioned in about 2 weeks, while she ultimately decided to go with her friend who posted inspirational quotes over sunset photos and had maybe 3,000 followers. It wasn't about the money or even getting credit for the work. It was about watching my family consistently choose amateur help over professional expertise simply because that expertise came from me. Marcus had his own way of reinforcing the dynamic, though his approach was more subtle than outright dismissal. He would ask thoughtful questions about my business that demonstrated he was listening and trying to understand what I did, but his follow-up comments always carried suggestions for how I could make my work more stable or conventional. He worried about my lack of employee benefits, questioned whether digital marketing was sustainable long-term, and frequently mentioned how much easier it would be to find investors or partners if I had completed my degree and had more traditional business credentials. These conversations were exhausting because they required me to constantly defend choices that were obviously working out well. Elevate Digital Marketing Agency was thriving by any reasonable measure. We had a waiting list of potential clients, our employee retention rate was exceptional, and our revenue growth was outpacing most established marketing firms in Austin. But because my success didn't fit the pattern that my family understood, it was always viewed as precarious rather than impressive. The contrast became even more stark when Marcus started sharing details about his own career progression. His work at Goldman Sachs involved managing investment portfolios for high-net-worth clients, and his explanations of market analysis and financial planning impressed everyone at family gatherings. Aunts and uncles asked detailed questions about retirement strategies and college savings plans, treating Marcus like a financial guru whose advice could transform their economic situation. He had this natural authority when discussing business matters that commanded immediate respect from everyone in the room. Meanwhile, when I tried to explain how digital marketing campaigns worked or describe the strategy behind a particularly successful client project, the conversations felt more like educational sessions where I was teaching people about concepts they found interesting but not immediately relevant to their lives. Even when I shared specific results like how we'd increased a client's revenue by 40% in 6 months, the response was more polite acknowledgement than genuine excitement or respect. The disconnect wasn't just about family dynamics. It reflected a broader generational gap in understanding how modern business actually functioned. My parents and their siblings had built their careers during an era when success meant physical products, tangible services, and clear hierarchical structure. Digital marketing felt too abstract and changeable to inspire the same confidence as construction projects or investment portfolios. They could see a building that Rodriguez Construction had completed, or understand how Marcus's financial advice had improved someone's retirement planning, but measuring the impact of social media engagement or website optimization required a different kind of business literacy. This fundamental misunderstanding became more pronounced as the wedding planning intensified. Ashley's family was equally traditional in their approach to career success, and they brought their own set of expectations about what constituted impressive professional achievement. Ashley's father was a successful surgeon, her mother was a retired professor, and their social circle consisted largely of doctors, lawyers, and established business owners. When they asked about my work, I could see them trying to categorize digital marketing within frameworks they understood, usually concluding that it was some kind of advertising or public relations work rather than recognizing it as a comprehensive business strategy discipline. The wedding planning process itself became a perfect microcosm of how my family viewed my professional capability. Ashley needed help with vendor coordination, timeline management, and budget tracking, all of which were exactly the kinds of project management skills that running a digital marketing agency had taught me. I offered to create a comprehensive planning system that would streamline every aspect of the wedding organization, complete with automated reminders, vendor communication tools, and budget tracking that would make the entire process more efficient and less stressful. Instead, Ashley decided to hire Isabella, our cousin who had recently completed a certification program in event planning and was eager to build her portfolio with family projects. Isabella was enthusiastic and well-meaning, but she approached wedding planning with the same organizational skills that had made her a competent administrative assistant rather than someone who understood complex project management. The result was a planning process that felt chaotic and stressful, with constant last-minute changes and vendor communications that created more confusion than clarity. Watching Isabella struggle with tasks that my team could have automated in a few hours was frustrating, but it also reinforced my understanding of how my family approached professional decision-making. They consistently chose familiarity over expertise, even when that choice created unnecessary complications. Isabella was family. She was trying to build a traditional service business that everyone could understand, and her struggles were viewed as normal parts of the learning process, rather than problems that could be solved more efficiently. The venue selection process revealed another layer of the dynamic that was shaping how my family viewed my professional success. Marcus and Ashley toured several prestigious locations around Austin, each offering different advantages in terms of ambiance, catering options, and guest capacity. They ultimately selected the Riverside Manor, which was absolutely beautiful but also notoriously difficult to work with in terms of vendor restrictions and coordination requirements. The venue had very specific rules about outside contractors, preferred vendor lists that clients were encouraged to use, and a reputation for last-minute changes that could derail even well-planned events. When I mentioned that I'd worked with several clients who had events at the Riverside Manor and could share insights about how to navigate their requirements more effectively, the response was appreciation for my offer to help, followed by reassurance that Isabella had everything under control. Ashley explained that the Riverside Manor provided a wedding coordinator who would handle all the vendor relationships and logistical details, so additional planning support wouldn't be necessary. What they didn't realize was that my experience with the Riverside Manor came from managing corporate events and product launches that were significantly more complex than most weddings. I understood their permit requirements, knew which vendors they preferred to work with, and had developed systems for managing their notoriously particular catering coordinator. This wasn't just general event planning knowledge, it was specific expertise that could have saved them dozens of hours and potentially thousands of dollars in vendor coordination fees. But expertise that came from digital marketing work apparently didn't translate to credibility in traditional event planning, even when that expertise was directly relevant to the challenges they were facing. It was another example of how my professional success existed in a parallel universe that rarely intersected with my family's understanding of valuable business skills. The bachelor and bachelorette party planning created yet another opportunity for me to offer professional skills that were politely declined in favor of more traditional approach. Ashley wanted to organize a weekend trip to Napa Valley that would create Instagram-worthy memories, while staying within a reasonable budget and accommodating the preferences of 8 different women with varying interests and financial constraints. This was essentially a complex logistics and marketing challenge that required research, coordination, and creative problem-solving skills that I used every day in my business. Instead of accepting my offer to create a comprehensive trip planning system, Ashley decided to work with Rachel, her lifestyle blogger friend, who approached the planning process as an opportunity to create content for her own social media rather than focusing on what would actually make the weekend enjoyable for everyone involved. The result was a trip that looked beautiful in photos but involved several logistical problems that created stress and extra expenses that could have been avoided with more thorough planning. Marcus's bachelor party planning followed a similar pattern, though his approach was more straightforward. He wanted to organize a golf weekend in Scottsdale with his college friends and work colleagues, which required coordinating flights, accommodations, and activities for 12 guys with busy schedules and different budget constraints. Tyler Brooks, his best man and law school roommate, took charge of the planning process and did a competent job, but he also made several booking mistakes that resulted in higher costs and less convenient arrangements than necessary. When I offered to help optimize their travel bookings and create a shared planning system that would streamline communication and expense tracking, Marcus thanked me but explained that Tyler had everything under control and adding more people to the planning process might create confusion. The underlying message was clear. Traditional planning methods, handled by people with conventional credentials, were preferable to more efficient approaches that came from someone whose professional expertise wasn't easily categorized. These repeated experiences of having my professional skills politely dismissed created a strange dynamic where I felt simultaneously proud of my business success and frustrated by my family's inability to recognize what I'd accomplished. Elevate Digital Marketing Agency was generating more revenue than most small businesses. We were consistently landing contracts with major clients, and our work was directly responsible for transforming how dozens of companies reached their customers. But because this success was happening in a sector that my family didn't fully understand, it was always viewed as less substantial than more traditional forms of business achievement. The contrast became even more pronounced when Marcus started sharing details about his wedding planning budget and the costs associated with different aspects of the celebration. The venue rental alone was more than most people's annual salaries, and the total budget for the wedding was approaching 6 figures when all the catering, photography, flowers, and entertainment expenses were included. Ashley's dress cost more than I'd spent on my first business computer, and they were treating these expenses as normal parts of creating the kind of wedding that reflected their social status and professional success. Meanwhile, I was quietly building wealth through strategic investments and business growth that was significantly outpacing what most people their age were achieving. But because my success wasn't visible in terms of traditional status symbols, it wasn't generating the same kind of family recognition or respect. I drove a practical Honda rather than a luxury car, lived in a renovated warehouse apartment rather than a suburban house, and spent money on business equipment and employee benefits rather than designer clothes or expensive vacation. The parking lot investment represented something different, though. Real estate ownership was something my family understood and respected, particularly commercial property in a rapidly developing area like East Austin. When the right moment came to reveal that investment, it would demonstrate business acumen in terms that even my most traditional relatives would find impressive. Property ownership was tangible, substantial, and aligned with the kind of wealth-building strategies that had worked for previous generations of successful business owners. But timing was crucial. Revealing the parking lot ownership too early would diminish its impact, while waiting too long might mean missing the opportunity to demonstrate just how well my unconventional career path was actually working out. The wedding planning process was creating multiple opportunities to showcase traditional business success, and I needed to find the perfect moment to add my own unexpected contribution to that narrative. The perfect opportunity came when Ashley started stressing about parking logistics for the wedding reception. The Riverside Manor was beautiful, but its parking capacity was limited, and they were expecting nearly 200 guests for the evening celebration. The venue's event coordinator had suggested several nearby parking options, but most were either inconveniently located or prohibitively expensive for guests who were already spending money on wedding gifts and formal attire. Ashley spent weeks researching parking alternatives, calling different lots to negotiate group rates, and trying to create a system that would ensure guests could park within reasonable walking distance without paying excessive fees. The stress was affecting her sleep and creating tension between her and Marcus, who felt like the parking situation was being blown out of proportion, but didn't have any practical solutions to offer. During one family dinner where Ashley was explaining her latest parking research findings, I listened to her describe exactly the kind of logistical challenges that my parking lot was perfectly positioned to solve. The location was ideal, the capacity was sufficient, and the pricing could be structured to provide convenient, affordable parking for wedding guests while generating revenue for the lot owner. It would have been easy to mention my ownership at that moment, but something held me back. Instead, I found myself thinking about all the times my family had politely declined my professional assistance, all the conversations where my business expertise had been dismissed as less substantial than traditional approach, and all the subtle ways they'd communicated that my success was interesting but not quite worthy of the same respect they showed for more conventional achievement. The parking lot represented an opportunity to demonstrate just how wrong they'd been about my business capabilities, but it also represented something more significant, a chance to show them what they'd been missing by consistently underestimating my strategic thinking and professional competence. The wedding was still several months away, which gave me time to position the parking lot revelation for maximum impact. I could continue letting Ashley stress about parking logistics while knowing that I held the perfect solution, waiting for exactly the right moment to demonstrate that the family member they'd been treating as professionally insignificant was actually the one person who could solve their most pressing wedding planning challenge. The anticipation of that moment was almost as satisfying as I imagined the actual revelation would be. Ashley's parking crisis reached a new level of intensity when she discovered that 2 of the lots she'd been counting on for guest parking had been sold to developers and would no longer be available by the wedding day. She called me at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, practically in tears, explaining that she'd just received emails from both parking facilities informing her that their operations would cease within the month due to upcoming construction projects. This left her with exactly one confirmed parking option that could accommodate maybe 60 cars, which was nowhere near sufficient for the guest list that had grown to over 200 people. I listened to Ashley describe her predicament while standing in my office, looking out the window at the city lights, and thinking about the parking lot that sat empty just a few miles away, perfectly positioned to solve every single problem she was describing. The lot could easily accommodate 150 cars. It was within walking distance of the Riverside Manor, and it offered the kind of convenient access that would make the wedding reception more enjoyable for everyone involved. But revealing my ownership at that moment would have felt like gloating over her crisis rather than demonstrating strategic foresight. Instead, I offered to help research additional parking options, suggesting that I could use my business connections to identify potential solutions that might not be obvious through normal channels. Ashley was grateful for the offer and asked if I could put together a comprehensive list of alternatives by the end of the week. This gave me an opportunity to demonstrate my research and problem-solving capabilities while still maintaining the element of surprise for the eventual revelation. Over the next 3 days, I conducted the most thorough parking analysis that Ashley probably could have imagined. I mapped every available lot within a reasonable radius of the Riverside Manor, analyzed pricing structures and capacity limitation, researched transportation options that could shuttle guests from more distant locations, and even investigated the possibility of negotiating temporary parking arrangements with nearby businesses that might not normally offer event parking. The resulting report was 15 pages of detailed recommendations with cost comparisons, logistic assessments, and contingency planning that would have impressed any professional event coordinator. When I presented the analysis to Ashley and Marcus during dinner at their apartment, their reaction was a mixture of gratitude and surprise at the thoroughness of my research. They'd expected maybe a few phone numbers and basic information, not a comprehensive strategic analysis that addressed every aspect of their parking challenge. Marcus flipped through the report with obvious admiration, commenting that it was more detailed than analyses he'd seen from consulting firms at his investment bank. The report included one particularly interesting option that I'd researched purely for the sake of completeness: a privately owned lot on the corner of 6th Street and Colorado River Boulevard that appeared to be ideally located but wasn't actively marketing itself for event parking. I'd noted that this lot might be worth investigating, though the owner's contact information wasn't readily available through normal channels. Ashley was intrigued by this option and asked if I thought I could track down the owner to inquire about availability and price. This was the perfect setup for what would eventually become the most satisfying conversation of the entire wedding planning process. But I wasn't quite ready to reveal my hand yet. Instead, I told Ashley that I'd see what I could find out about the mysterious parking lot owner and get back to her with more information. The anticipation of that eventual conversation was delicious, and I found myself savoring the knowledge that I held the perfect solution to her most stressful wedding planning challenge. Meanwhile, the broader family dynamics continued to reinforce the patterns that had been developing throughout the engagement period. Uncle Miguel, who'd always been the unofficial patriarch of extended family gatherings, made his annual visit to Austin and spent an entire evening grilling Marcus about his career prospects and long-term financial planning. Miguel had built a successful chain of auto repair shops throughout South Texas and considered himself an expert on business strategy and wealth building. His conversations with Marcus were intense and detailed, covering everything from investment diversification to retirement planning strategy. When Miguel turned his attention to my business, the conversation was notably different in tone and depth. He asked polite questions about digital marketing and listened to my explanations with the kind of patience that adults show when children describe their hobby. His follow-up comments focused on the importance of building stable, long-term business relationships and suggested that I should consider transitioning into more traditional forms of marketing as my career matured. The underlying assumption was that digital marketing was a temporary trend, rather than a fundamental shift in how modern businesses operated. The most frustrating part of these conversations was that Miguel's business advice wasn't necessarily wrong, just incomplete. His emphasis on customer relationships and long-term thinking was absolutely valid, but he couldn't see how those principles applied to digital marketing because he didn't understand the industry well enough to recognize the strategic complexity involved. To him, managing social media accounts and creating websites seemed like tasks that anyone with basic computer skills could handle, rather than specialized expertise that required deep understanding of consumer psychology, data analysis, and strategic communication. This generational disconnect became even more apparent when Miguel started sharing stories about his own business development strategy. He'd built his auto repair empire by identifying underserved markets, negotiating favorable lease terms, and developing relationships with parts suppliers that gave him competitive advantages over other shops in his area. These were exactly the kinds of strategic thinking and relationship building skills that I used every day in my digital marketing work, but because the industry context was different, the similarities weren't obvious to him. The irony was that Miguel's approach to business expansion was actually very similar to my strategy for building Elevate Digital Marketing Agency, just applied to different industries and using different tools. We'd both identified emerging opportunities that others were overlooking, built competitive advantages through specialized knowledge and strategic partnerships, and focused on delivering value that clients couldn't easily find elsewhere. The main difference was that his success was visible in terms of physical locations and traditional business metrics, while mine was measured through digital analytics and online performance indicators. This pattern of partial recognition extended to other family members as well. Cousin Sophia, who worked as a financial advisor for a major banking company, was genuinely interested in understanding how digital marketing campaigns generated measurable returns on investment. She asked intelligent questions about client acquisition costs and customer lifetime value calculations that demonstrated she understood the underlying business principles even if she wasn't familiar with the specific metrics and tools involved. But even Sophia's interest was framed in terms of how digital marketing compared to more traditional advertising methods, rather than recognizing it as a distinct discipline with its own strategic frameworks and competitive advantage. Her questions implied that digital marketing was essentially an updated version of print advertising or television commercials, rather than understanding that it represented a fundamentally different approach to customer engagement and business growth. These conversations were educational for me, in ways that my family probably didn't realize. They helped me understand that the disconnect wasn't necessarily about their inability to recognize success, but about the frameworks they use to evaluate and categorize different types of business achievement. Digital marketing didn't fit neatly into the categories they understood, so it was consistently viewed as less substantial than more familiar forms of professional accomplishment. The wedding planning process continued to provide opportunities for these dynamics to play out in increasingly specific ways. Ashley decided to hire a professional photographer whose work she'd discovered through Instagram, and she spent weeks researching different photographers' portfolios, pricing structures, and availability for her wedding date. The selection process was thorough and sophisticated, involving detailed comparisons of artistic styles, technical capabilities, and client testimonials that demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic evaluation skills that I used when helping my clients choose marketing vendor. When Ashley asked for my opinion about her photographer finalists, I was able to provide insights that went well beyond just artistic preference. I could analyze their social media presence, evaluate their business positioning strategies, and assess their technical capabilities in ways that helped Ashley make a more informed decision. My feedback included observations about which photographers were likely to be more reliable based on their client communication patterns, which ones offered better value propositions considering their full service offering, which artistic styles would photograph best for the kind of social media sharing that Ashley wanted to encourage during the wedding. Ashley was impressed by the depth of my analysis and thanked me for insights she wouldn't have considered on her own. But the conversation also highlighted the ongoing disconnect about my professional expertise. She treated my feedback as helpful advice from someone who understood social media rather than recognizing it as professional consultation from someone whose business specialized in exactly these kinds of strategic evaluation. The distinction might seem subtle, but it reflected the broader pattern of my family appreciating my contributions while not quite recognizing them as demonstrations of serious business expertise. The vendor selection process created similar dynamics across multiple aspects of the wedding planning. Ashley needed to choose caterers, florists, transportation services, and entertainment options, all of which required the kind of vendor evaluation and project coordination skills that were central to my daily work responsibility. Each time I offered input or assistance, the response was gratitude for my helpfulness rather than recognition that I was applying professional expertise that could have streamlined the entire planning process. Marcus had his own version of this dynamic playing out with his groomsmen selection and bachelor party coordination. Tyler Brooks was handling most of the logistics, but Marcus occasionally asked for my suggestions about group activities or restaurant recommendations, based on my knowledge of Austin's entertainment scene. These conversations were friendly and collaborative, but they positioned me as someone with local knowledge rather than someone whose business regularly organized corporate events and client entertainment that required much more complex coordination than a bachelor party weekend. The most telling example came when Marcus mentioned that several of his Goldman Sachs colleagues were flying in for the wedding, and he wanted to organize a welcome dinner that would showcase Austin's dining scene while accommodating various dietary restrictions and budget considerations. This was exactly the kind of event planning challenge that my team handled regularly for corporate clients, and I could have created a comprehensive solution that addressed every logistical detail while ensuring a memorable experience for his out-of-town guests. Instead, Marcus decided to work with Tyler to make restaurant reservations and coordinate transportation, treating it as a straightforward social planning task, rather than recognizing it as an opportunity to leverage professional event management expertise. The result was a perfectly adequate welcome dinner that accomplished its basic objectives, but missed opportunities to create the kind of sophisticated, well-coordinated experience that would have impressed his colleagues and reflected positively on his attention to detail and organizational capabilities. These missed opportunities weren't necessarily problematic in themselves, but they represented a broader pattern of my family consistently choosing amateur coordination over professional expertise, simply because that expertise came from someone whose credibility hadn't been established in traditional business context. It was like watching people struggle to assemble furniture while declining help from a carpenter because they didn't realize that furniture assembly was part of carpentry work. The pattern became even more pronounced when wedding gift registries and financial planning conversations started happening. Ashley and Marcus spent considerable time researching household items and creating registries that would help them establish their married life together. The process involved analyzing product quality, comparing prices across different retailers, and thinking strategically about which items would provide the best long-term value considering their lifestyle and future plans. When they asked for my input about technology purchases and home office equipment, I was able to provide detailed recommendations based on my experience outfitting a professional workspace and staying current with technology trends that affect business productivity. But these conversations were framed as requests for consumer advice rather than professional consultation, even though my recommendations were based on years of experience making technology investments for business purposes. The financial planning discussions were particularly interesting because they revealed how differently Marcus and I approached wealth building and investment strategy. Marcus was focused on traditional financial instruments like retirement accounts, mutual funds, and real estate investments that aligned with conventional financial planning advice. His approach was methodical and conservative, emphasizing steady growth and risk management strategies that would provide security over long-term time horizon. My approach to wealth building was more entrepreneurial and opportunistic, focusing on business reinvestment and strategic acquisitions that could generate higher returns but required more active management and market analysis. The parking lot purchase was a perfect example of this philosophy, representing exactly the kind of calculated risk that could produce substantial returns if the underlying analysis was correct. But because my investment strategy didn't fit traditional financial planning frameworks, it wasn't generating the same kind of family recognition or respect that Marcus's more conventional approach received. The contrast became particularly evident when Uncle Miguel started giving Marcus detailed advice about real estate investment and property management strategy. Miguel owned several rental properties in addition to his auto repair businesses, and he considered real estate ownership an essential component of long-term wealth building. His conversations with Marcus were sophisticated and detailed, covering topics like cash flow analysis, property appreciation trends, and tax advantages that demonstrated genuine expertise in real estate investment. Meanwhile, I was sitting there knowing that I'd recently completed exactly the kind of strategic real estate acquisition that Miguel was encouraging Marcus to consider, but unable to share that information without revealing the parking lot ownership prematurely. It was surreal to listen to detailed advice about real estate investment strategies while knowing that I'd already implemented a more sophisticated version of exactly what was being discussed. The timing of the revelation was becoming increasingly important as the wedding date approached and Ashley's parking stress reached crisis level. She'd managed to secure temporary arrangements with a few additional lots, but the solutions were complicated and expensive, requiring shuttle services and advanced coordination that added logistical complexity to an already demanding event planning process. The perfect solution was sitting right there waiting to be revealed at exactly the right moment for maximum impact. That moment was approaching faster than I'd anticipated, because Ashley had started making desperate inquiries about the mysterious parking lot that I'd mentioned in my research report. She'd tried calling the city planning office to identify the owner, searched online property records, and even considered driving by the lot to see if there were any contact signs posted. Her determination to solve the parking crisis was admirable, but it was also creating pressure for me to either reveal my ownership or continue letting her struggle with an increasingly stressful situation. The decision about when and how to reveal the parking lot ownership was complicated by my desire to ensure maximum impact while avoiding any appearance of cruelty or manipulation. I genuinely wanted Ashley and Marcus to have a beautiful wedding with convenient parking for their guests, but I also wanted the moment of revelation to demonstrate just how significantly my family had underestimated my business capabilities and strategic thinking. The perfect opportunity was approaching, and I could feel the anticipation building toward what would become the most satisfying conversation of the entire wedding planning process. The morning of Marcus and Ashley's wedding arrived with the kind of perfect October weather that makes Austin feel like the most beautiful city in the world. Clear blue skies, comfortable temperatures, and just enough breeze to keep the outdoor ceremony feeling fresh and elegant. I spent the morning getting ready in my downtown apartment, carefully selecting an outfit that would photograph well and reflect the sophisticated image I'd been cultivating throughout my business career. The dress was a deep emerald green that complemented my skin tone beautifully, and I'd invested in professional hair and makeup that would ensure I looked polished and confident for what I knew would be a memorable day. As I drove toward the Riverside Manor, I couldn't help but smile at the irony of the situation that was about to unfold. My route took me directly past the parking lot that I'd owned for over a year, and I could see the temporary signs that my management company had installed directing wedding guests to the available parking spaces. The lot looked perfect, with fresh gravel recently laid and clear directional signage that would make parking easy and convenient for everyone attending the reception. Jake Morrison, the attendant I'd hired specifically for the wedding, was already positioned at the entrance with his payment tablet and the kind of professional demeanor that would create a positive first impression for the guests. The ceremony itself was absolutely beautiful, held in the Riverside Manor's garden pavilion overlooking Lady Bird Lake. Ashley looked stunning in her designer gown, and Marcus was clearly emotional as he watched her walk down the aisle. Despite all the family dynamics and professional frustrations I'd experienced over the past year, I felt genuinely happy for them as they exchanged vows. They were starting their married life together with the kind of celebration that reflected their personalities and the support of everyone who cared about them. During the cocktail hour that followed the ceremony, I mingled with relatives and family friends, accepting compliments on my appearance and making conversation about the beautiful venue and perfect weather. Several cousins mentioned that they'd been impressed by my recent business success, though their comments still carried the slightly puzzled tone that I'd become accustomed to when family members tried to understand what digital marketing actually involved. Aunt Rosa asked if I was still doing the computer work and seemed surprised when I explained that Elevate Digital Marketing Agency now employed 18 people and worked with clients across multiple industries. The conversations were pleasant but predictable, following the same patterns that had characterized family gatherings for years. People were polite and interested in my work, but their questions revealed that they still viewed digital marketing as something mysterious and potentially temporary, rather than recognizing it as a legitimate business discipline with substantial growth potential. Even when I mentioned specific client successes or revenue milestones, the responses were more curious than impressed, as if they were trying to understand how something they didn't fully grasp could be generating the kind of results I was describing. Marcus spent the cocktail hour working the room like the skilled networker he'd become, introducing Ashley to his Goldman Sachs colleagues and making sure that everyone felt welcomed and included in the celebration. He had this natural ability to make people feel important and valued, remembering details about their lives and asking follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine interest in their experience. Watching him interact with the guests reminded me why he'd been so successful in finance and why our parents had always been so proud of his interpersonal skill. Tyler Brooks was playing his role as best man with enthusiasm and competence,
coordinating with the wedding coordinator to ensure that everything was running smoothly and handling the various small crises that inevitably arise during large events. He'd clearly invested considerable time and energy in making sure that Marcus and Ashley's wedding day would be perfect, and his attention to detail was evident in everything from the perfectly arranged groomsmen photos to the seamless transition between different parts of the celebration. As the evening progressed and guests began moving toward the reception area, I noticed increasing activity in the parking lot across the street. Cars were arriving steadily, and Jake was efficiently directing drivers to available spaces while processing payments through the mobile system I'd set up for the event. The operation was running smoothly with no lines or confusion, exactly as I'd planned when I'd designed the parking management system specifically for this kind of high-volume event. The reception dinner was elegant and well-coordinated, with excellent food and seamless service that reflected the venue's reputation for hosting sophisticated events. I was seated at a table with several family friends and distant relatives, which gave me an opportunity to observe the broader dynamics of the celebration without being drawn into intense conversations with immediate family members. The table assignments had been carefully planned to ensure good conversation flow, and I found myself enjoying discussions about travel, career changes, and the various life transitions that people in their late 20s and early 30s were navigating.
During the dinner, I overheard several conversations about the parking situation, with guests commenting positively about how convenient and affordable the lot across the street had been. One of Marcus's colleagues mentioned that he'd been dreading the parking situation based on his previous experiences with Austin events, but finding a reasonably priced spot within walking distance had eliminated that source of stress entirely. Another guest commented that the parking attendant had been professional and helpful, making the arrival process much smoother than expected. These casual comments were deeply satisfying to hear, because they confirmed that my strategic investment was not only solving Ashley's logistical challenge, but also contributing to the positive experience that all the wedding guests were having. The parking lot was performing exactly as I'd envisioned when I'd first analyzed its potential, generating revenue while providing genuine value to the people who used it. It was a perfect example of how strategic thinking and market analysis could create win-win situations that benefited everyone involved. As the evening entertainment began and guests started moving around more freely, I noticed Tyler Brooks looking slightly stressed and checking his phone more frequently than usual. He was clearly dealing with some kind of logistical issue, though he was handling it discreetly to avoid creating any disruption to the celebration. I was curious about what might be causing his concern, but I didn't want to intrude on his responsibilities as best man by asking directly about any problems he might be managing. The answer came clear about an hour later when Tyler approached me with an apologetic expression and the kind of slightly desperate look that indicates someone is dealing with an unexpected crisis. He explained that he'd parked in a different lot earlier in the day, but that lot had closed earlier than expected, and his Tesla was now locked behind a gate that wouldn't reopen until Monday morning. He'd been trying to reach the lot owner or management company without success, and he was starting to worry about how he was going to get home after the reception. Several other guests had apparently experienced similar problems with various parking arrangements around the venue, and Tyler was trying to coordinate solutions while maintaining his composure and avoiding any disruption to Marcus and Ashley's celebration. He'd heard that the lot across the street had been accommodating and well managed, and he was hoping to find the owner or manager to see if they might have space for his car overnight, or could provide guidance about secure parking options in the area. This was the moment I'd been anticipating for months, though it was unfolding even more perfectly than I could have choreographed. Tyler was approaching me not as Marcus's sister who needed to be politely included in conversations, but as someone he hoped might be able to help solve a legitimate problem that was affecting multiple wedding guests. The power dynamic was completely different from the usual family interactions, because he was asking for assistance with something that actually mattered to him rather than making polite conversation about topics he didn't particularly care about. I listened to Tyler's explanation with the kind of calm professionalism that I'd developed through years of managing client crises and coordinating complex projects. His problem was definitely solvable, and I could see several potential solutions that would ensure he could retrieve his car and get home safely. The question was how to reveal my connection to the parking lot in a way that would create maximum impact while still being helpful and appropriate for the wedding celebration. Rather than immediately revealing my ownership, I told Tyler that I might be able to help him get in touch with the right person to address his parking situation. I suggested that we step outside so I could make a few phone calls without disturbing the reception, and Tyler gratefully accepted the offer. As we walked toward the venue's exit, he thanked me repeatedly for being willing to help with what he clearly viewed as an embarrassing situation that could have ruined the end of an otherwise perfect celebration. Once we were outside, I could see the parking lot across the street operating smoothly, with Jake still at his post even though most of the wedding guests had already arrived and parked. The lot was well lit and clearly managed, creating exactly the kind of professional appearance that I'd envisioned when I'd invested in upgrading the facility's infrastructure and appearance. Tyler commented on how much better organized this lot seemed compared to some of the other parking options he'd encountered earlier in the day. I pulled out my phone and made a show of scrolling through my contacts, as if I was looking for the right person to call about Tyler's parking situation. The anticipation of the revelation was almost overwhelming, because I knew that the next few minutes would completely transform how Tyler and eventually the rest of my family understood my business capabilities and strategic thinking. This wasn't just about solving a parking problem, it was about demonstrating that I possessed exactly the kind of foresight and professional competence that had been consistently underestimated throughout the wedding planning process. Instead of making a phone call, I looked directly at Tyler and said, "Actually, I think I can help you more directly than you might expect. I'm the owner of this parking lot and I'd be happy to make sure you have a secure place to park your car tonight." The expression on his face was absolutely priceless, cycling through confusion, surprise, and then something approaching amazement as he processed what I'd just told him. Tyler's first reaction was to assume that I was joking or that he'd misunderstood what I'd said. He laughed nervously and asked if I was serious, clearly struggling to reconcile the information I'd just shared with his understanding of who I was and what I did for a living. When I confirmed that I was completely serious and explained that I'd owned the parking lot for over a year, his expression shifted to something that I'd never seen directed toward me before: genuine respect and professional recognition. The questions came quickly after that. How had I identified this property as an investment opportunity? What was involved in acquiring and operating a commercial parking facility? How did I coordinate with the city and handle the various regulatory requirements? Tyler's background in corporate law meant that he understood the complexity of commercial real estate transactions, and he was clearly impressed by the strategic thinking that had led to this investment. As I explained the analysis I'd conducted before purchasing the lot, Tyler's respect for my business acumen became increasingly evident. He understood that identifying undervalued real estate in a rapidly developing area required sophisticated market analysis and considerable risk tolerance. The fact that I'd not only identified the opportunity but also successfully executed the acquisition and ongoing management demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking that he respected in his professional life. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus, who had noticed that his best man was missing from the reception and had come looking for him. When he found us standing in the parking lot having what appeared to be an intense business discussion, his curiosity was immediately piqued. Tyler, still processing the revelation about my property ownership, excitedly explained that I was the owner of the parking lot that had been solving everyone's parking challenges throughout the evening. Marcus's reaction was even more dramatic than Tyler's had. He stared at me for several seconds in complete silence, clearly struggling to process this information and understand how his sister had managed to secretly own the perfect solution to Ashley's most stressful wedding planning challenge. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of amazement and something that might have been admiration. "You've owned this parking lot the whole time Ashley was stressing about parking arrangement." The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications about family dynamics, business capabilities, and the months of planning conversations where I'd offered to help with logistics, while knowing that I possessed the perfect solution to their most significant challenge. Marcus was clearly grappling with the realization that his sister, whose professional expertise had been politely dismissed throughout the wedding planning process, had been quietly positioned to solve their biggest problem all along. Before I could respond, Ashley appeared at the venue entrance, looking for both Marcus and Tyler with the kind of slightly frantic expression that indicated she was concerned about missing groomsmen during the reception. When she spotted us in the parking lot, She hurried over to find out what kind of emergency had drawn the best man and groom away from the celebration. Tyler, still energized by the revelation, immediately launched into an explanation of what he'd just learned about my property ownership. Ashley's reaction was even more complex than Marcus's had been. She'd spent months researching parking options, stressing about guest convenience, and trying to coordinate multiple complicated arrangements to ensure that everyone could park within reasonable distance of the venue. Learning that the perfect solution had been owned by her future sister-in-law throughout the entire planning process created a mixture of relief, amazement, and what appeared to be slight embarrassment about how she'd approached the parking logistic. The conversation that followed was unlike any family discussion I'd ever experienced. Instead of polite questions about my business, or gentle suggestions about how I might make my career more stable, Marcus and Ashley were asking detailed questions about commercial real estate investment, property management, and strategic business planning. They wanted to understand how I'd identified this opportunity, what kind of due diligence I'd conducted, and how I'd managed the acquisition and ongoing operation. For the first time in years, I felt like my family was genuinely recognizing my business expertise and strategic thinking capabilities. The questions they were asking demonstrated that they understood the complexity of what I'd accomplished and respected the professional competence it had required. The parking lot ownership wasn't just a lucky investment. It was evidence of exactly the kind of business acumen that they'd been consistently underestimating throughout my entire career. As we stood there in the parking lot, with the wedding reception continuing in the background and my family finally understanding the scope of my business capabilities, I realized that this moment represented more than just a satisfying revelation. It was a fundamental shift in how my family viewed my professional achievements and strategic thinking abilities. The parking lot had become a symbol of everything they'd been missing when they'd dismissed my digital marketing expertise as less substantial than traditional business success. The evening concluded with Marcus and Ashley asking if I would be willing to provide guidance about real estate investment opportunities and business strategy. Recognizing that my success hadn't been accidental but had resulted from exactly the kind of strategic thinking and market analysis that they'd been seeking from expensive consultants, Tyler asked for my business card and mentioned that his law firm had clients who might benefit from the kind of strategic digital marketing services that my company provided. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how a simple parking lot had become the catalyst for transforming my family's understanding of my business capabilities. The investment had been successful in financial terms, but its real value had been in demonstrating that my unconventional career path had led to exactly the kind of strategic thinking and professional competence that they'd always respected, just applied to industries and opportunities they hadn't fully understood. The wedding had been beautiful. The parking lot had performed perfectly, and my family had finally recognized that their assumptions about my professional capabilities had been completely wrong. Sometimes the most satisfying victories are the ones that happen quietly, through strategic positioning and patient timing rather than dramatic confrontation. The parking lot revelation had been worth every month of planning and every moment of anticipation. The weeks following Marcus and Ashley's wedding brought changes to our family dynamics that I never could have anticipated when I first purchased that parking lot over a year earlier. The revelation had created ripple effects that extended far beyond solving Tyler's immediate parking crisis, fundamentally altering how everyone in my extended family understood my business capabilities and strategic thinking. What had started as a simple real estate investment had become the catalyst for transforming decades of assumptions about my professional competence and career trajectory. The most immediate change was in how my parents approached conversations about my business. Instead of the polite but slightly concerned questions about the sustainability of digital marketing, they began asking detailed questions about my investment strategy and long-term business planning. My father, who had spent years suggesting that I should focus on more traditional career paths, suddenly wanted to understand how I'd identified the parking lot as an undervalued asset and what other real estate opportunities I might be considering. During our first family dinner after the wedding, Roberto asked me to explain the due diligence process I'd used before purchasing the parking lot. He was genuinely curious about how commercial real estate analysis worked and whether the skills I'd developed in digital marketing had contributed to my ability to evaluate property investment. The conversation was completely different from any business discussion we'd ever had. because he was approaching me as someone whose expertise he wanted to understand rather than someone whose choices he was trying to guide toward more conventional alternatives. My mother Carmen had her own version of this transformation, though her questions focused more on the practical aspects of property management and the coordination skills required to operate a successful parking facility. She'd always been the organizational backbone of Rodriguez Construction, handling everything from employee scheduling to client communications, so she understood the complexity involved in managing any business operation. Her questions about how I coordinated with city regulations, managed daily operations, and maintained the property demonstrated that she finally recognized my work as requiring serious business skills rather than just technical computer knowledge. The shift in my parents' perspective was particularly meaningful, because it represented an acknowledgement that my unconventional career path had led to exactly the kind of strategic thinking and business acumen that they'd always valued. They weren't just impressed by the financial success of the parking lot investment, they were recognizing that the analysis and planning required to identify and execute that investment demonstrated professional capabilities that they'd been underestimating for years. Marcus had his own process of recalibrating his understanding of my business expertise. In the days following the wedding, he called me several times to discuss real estate investment strategies and ask for advice about opportunities he was considering. His questions were sophisticated and detailed, reflecting his financial background, but they also carried a tone of respect that had been missing from our previous conversations about business. He was approaching me as a peer whose judgment he valued rather than a younger sister whose ideas were interesting but not particularly substantial. The conversation that had the most impact came about 2 weeks after the wedding, when Marcus asked if I would be willing to review a commercial real estate investment proposal that he and Ashley were considering. They'd found a duplex in East Austin that they thought might be a good rental property investment, and they wanted my perspective on the neighborhood development trends and market analysis. This was exactly the kind of consultation that I would have offered years earlier, but the request was coming from a place of genuine respect for my expertise, rather than polite inclusion in their decision-making process. As I reviewed their investment proposal, I realized that my analysis was significantly more sophisticated than what they'd received from their real estate agent or financial advisor. I was able to provide insights about neighborhood development patterns, demographic trends, and market dynamics that went well beyond basic property valuation. My understanding of Austin's growth patterns, combined with my experience analyzing market opportunities for digital marketing clients, gave me a unique perspective on real estate investment that was proving genuinely valuable to my family. Ashley's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic, because she'd been the most directly affected by the parking lot revelation. Learning that the perfect solution to her most stressful wedding planning challenge had been owned by her future sister-in-law throughout the entire planning process had forced her to completely reconsider her assumptions about my professional capability. The parking lot wasn't just a convenient coincidence. It was evidence of exactly the kind of strategic foresight and business planning that she'd been seeking from expensive wedding planners and consultants. In the weeks following the wedding, Ashley began reaching out for advice about various business and investment decisions that she and Marcus were making as they started their married life together. Her interior design business was growing rapidly, and she was facing decisions about expanding her team, investing in new technology, and developing marketing strategies that would help her reach higher-end clients. These were exactly the kinds of strategic challenges that my digital marketing expertise could address, and for the first time she was approaching me as a professional consultant rather than family member offering to help. The most satisfying aspect of Ashley's transformation was watching her recognize the connection between the business skills I demonstrated through the parking lot investment and the digital marketing expertise she'd been politely dismissing for years. She began asking detailed questions about online marketing strategies, social media presence, and customer acquisition techniques that demonstrated she finally understood that digital marketing wasn't just about managing social media accounts, but involved sophisticated strategic thinking and analytical capability. The extended family's reaction to the parking lot revelation created additional opportunities for me to demonstrate my business expertise in contexts that commanded genuine respect. Uncle Miguel, who had spent years treating my digital marketing work as an interesting hobby rather than serious business expertise, suddenly
wanted to understand how I'd identified and executed the real estate investment. His questions were detailed and sophisticated, reflecting his own experience with business development and property investment. The conversation with Miguel was particularly meaningful because it allowed me to explain how the analytical skills I'd developed through digital marketing had contributed to my ability to evaluate real estate opportunity. Market analysis, demographic research, and trend identification were central to both industries, just applied to different types of assets and customer behavior. Miguel's growing understanding of these connections helped him recognize that my success wasn't accidental but resulted from exactly the kind of strategic thinking that he'd always respected in traditional business context. Cousin Sophia, the financial advisor who had always been interested in understanding my business, but hadn't quite grasped its strategic complexity, became one of my strongest advocates within the extended family. She began referring clients to Elevate Digital Marketing Agency and asking for my input on investment opportunities that her clients were considering. The parking lot revelation had provided concrete evidence of my analytical capabilities that translated directly to her understanding of what constituted serious business expertise. The most unexpected development was the number of business referrals and collaboration opportunities that emerged from family members who finally understood the scope of my professional capability. Tyler Brooks, Marcus's best man, whose parking crisis had triggered the entire revelation, introduced me to several clients at his law firm who needed comprehensive digital marketing strategy. These weren't courtesy referrals motivated by family connections. They were professional recommendations based on his recognition of my strategic thinking and business acumen. The referrals from Tyler led to some of the most sophisticated and lucrative contracts that Elevate Digital Marketing Agency had ever landed. His law firm specialized in representing technology companies and startups, which meant that his clients were exactly the kind of forward-thinking businesses that could benefit most from advanced digital marketing strategy. The projects were complex and challenging, requiring exactly the kind of strategic analysis and creative problem-solving that I'd been perfecting for years. Working with Tyler's referrals also provided opportunities to demonstrate my business expertise in contexts that commanded respect from other professionals. The lawyers, entrepreneurs and investors in Tyler's network evaluated my work based on results and strategic value rather than preconceived notions about digital marketing or family dynamics. The success of these projects generated additional referrals and established my reputation within Austin's professional community in ways that transcended any family relationship. The growth of my business following the wedding revelation was remarkable, but it was also validation that my expertise had always been substantial. The main barrier had been other people's understanding and recognition of what I was accomplishing. The parking lot had served as a translator, demonstrating my strategic thinking in terms that everyone could understand and respect. Once that translation had occurred, the true scope of my professional capabilities became evident to everyone who had been underestimating them for years. The financial impact of the increased business was significant, but the professional recognition was even more valuable. For the first time in my career, I was being approached as an expert whose advice was actively sought rather than someone whose offers of assistance were politely acknowledged but not seriously considered. The transformation was evident in everything from the types of questions people asked about my work to the way they introduced me to their colleagues and clients. The parking lot itself continued to be a valuable investment, generating steady income while appreciating in value as East Austin's development accelerated. Several developers had approached me about purchasing the property for construction projects, and the offers were substantially higher than what I'd paid just over a year earlier. But the lot's value as a symbol of my strategic thinking and business acumen had become more important than its immediate financial return. The decision about whether to sell the parking lot or continue operating it became an interesting case study in strategic thinking that my family was now qualified to appreciate. The development offers were attractive, but the ongoing revenue and strategic location suggested that holding the property longer might generate even greater return. My family's input on this decision was sophisticated and valuable, reflecting their newfound understanding of real estate investment and their respect for my analytical capabilities. The most profound change was in how I felt about family gatherings and business conversations with relatives. Instead of feeling like I was constantly defending unconventional choices or explaining why digital marketing constituted legitimate business expertise, I was being included in strategic discussions as someone whose judgment was valued and respected. The transformation was evident in everything from seating arrangements at family dinners to the types of questions people asked about my work and investment decisions. The wedding revelation had also created opportunities for me to help other family members with their own business challenges and investment decisions. Cousin Isabella, who had struggled with the wedding planning coordination, asked for my help developing systems and processes that would make her event planning business more efficient and professional. The conversation was completely different from our interactions during the wedding planning, because she was approaching me as someone whose organizational and analytical skills she wanted to learn from rather than someone whose offers of assistance she was politely declining. Uncle Miguel's auto repair business was facing challenges related to online customer acquisition and reputation management, areas where my digital marketing expertise could provide immediate value. His willingness to seek my professional consultation represented a complete reversal from his previous assumptions about the relevance of digital marketing to traditional business. The projects we developed together were successful and profitable for both of us, but they also demonstrated how my expertise could benefit family members in ways that hadn't been possible when my capabilities were misunderstood. The ripple effects extended beyond immediate family to friends and colleagues who had witnessed the transformation in how my family discussed my professional achievement. People who had known me for years began asking different questions about my business and seeking advice about their own career and investment decisions. The parking lot revelation had served as a catalyst for broader recognition of my strategic thinking and business acumen that extended well beyond the specific real estate investment. As I reflected on the year since the wedding, I realized that the parking lot purchase had been successful in ways that went far beyond financial returns or convenient event parking. It had become the foundation for transforming my relationships with family members and establishing my professional reputation within Austin's business community. The investment had demonstrated that success in unconventional industries could translate to recognition and respect in traditional business contexts, but only when that success was visible in terms that others could understand and appreciate. The most satisfying aspect of the entire experience was watching my family recognize that their assumptions about my professional capabilities had been completely wrong. The parking lot hadn't just solved Ashley's wedding logistics, it had revealed that the family member they'd been treating as professional and experienced possessed exactly the kind of strategic thinking and business acumen that they'd always valued. The revelation had been worth every month of planning and every moment of anticipation because it had fundamentally changed how my family understood my career achievements and future potential. Looking forward, the relationships and recognition that had emerged from the wedding revelation were creating opportunities for business growth and professional development that wouldn't have been possible without that moment of dramatic clarity. The parking lot would always be special not just as a successful investment but as the catalyst for transforming years of underestimation into genuine respect and professional recognition that continues to generate value in ways I'm still discovering. The wedding day that had started with paying $50 for parking had ended with my family finally understanding that they'd been consistently underestimating someone whose business expertise could have been benefiting them all along.
Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen not through dramatic confrontation, but through patient strategic positioning and perfect timing that allows the truth to reveal itself in ways that nobody can ignore or dismiss. 6 months after Marcus and Ashley's wedding, I found myself sitting in a boardroom on the 32nd floor of a downtown Austin high-rise, presenting a comprehensive digital transformation strategy to the executive team of Henderson Global Holdings, one of the largest investment firms in Texas. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now being paid more for a single consultation than most people made in several months, all because a parking lot revelation had finally convinced my family and their networks that my business expertise was worth taking seriously. The Henderson contract had come through a referral chain that traced directly back to Tyler Brooks, who had been so impressed by my strategic thinking during his parking crisis that he'd mentioned my capabilities to his senior partners. Those partners had clients who needed exactly the kind of sophisticated digital marketing strategies that Elevate digital marketing agencies specialized in, and my success with their initial projects had generated additional referrals throughout Austin's investment and legal community. What had started as solving a simple parking problem had evolved into recognition as one of the city's most innovative business strategists. The presentation I was delivering to Henderson Global Holdings represented everything I'd been working toward throughout my entire career. They were considering a major expansion into technology sector investments and needed a comprehensive analysis of how digital marketing trends would affect their portfolio companies over the next 5 years. The project required exactly the kind of strategic thinking and market analysis that had led me to identify the parking lot as an undervalued asset, just applied to a much larger scale with significantly higher stakes. As I explained my analysis of emerging digital platforms and their potential impact on traditional business models, I could see the Henderson executives recognizing the same analytical capabilities that had impressed my family during our post-wedding conversation. The difference was that Henderson Global Holdings was paying me $200,000 for insights that my family had been politely dismissing for years, simply because they now understood the value of strategic foresight in rapidly changing markets. The Henderson project was just one example of how the wedding revelation had created a cascade of professional opportunities that were transforming both my business and my personal wealth. Elevate Digital Marketing Agency had grown from 18 employees to 35 in just 6 months, and our client base now included some of the most sophisticated companies in Austin's technology sector. The revenue growth was remarkable, but the shift in how potential clients perceived my expertise was even more significant. Instead of having to convince prospects that digital marketing required serious strategic thinking, I was now being approached by companies that specifically wanted to work with someone who had demonstrated the kind of analytical capabilities that led to successful real estate investments, alongside digital marketing expertise. The parking lot had become a credential that translated my professional competence into terms that traditional business leaders could immediately understand and respect. The financial success was enabling investment opportunities that I'd never imagined when I was struggling to convince my family that digital marketing constituted legitimate business expertise. I'd recently purchased a second commercial property, an underutilized office building in South Austin, that I planned to convert into a mixed-use development targeting the city's growing creative industry. The project would combine my understanding of digital marketing trends with real estate development, creating exactly the kind of innovative business model that was driving Austin's economic growth. The office building purchase had generated another round of family conversations about my investment strategy and business planning capability. My parents were now actively seeking my advice about Rodriguez Construction's expansion plans, recognizing that my understanding of market trends and demographic analysis could help them identify the most promising opportunities for growth. The transformation from polite tolerance of my career choices to active consultation on major business decisions represented a complete reversal of our family dynamic. Roberto had recently asked me to conduct a comprehensive analysis of Austin's residential construction market, focusing on how changing demographics and lifestyle preferences were affecting demand for different types of housing. The project required exactly the kind of research and strategic analysis that I'd been perfecting through my digital marketing work, but applied to his industry in ways that could directly impact Rodriguez Construction's future profitability. The fact that he was paying me professional consulting fees for this analysis demonstrated how completely his understanding of my capabilities had evolved. Carmen had her own version of this transformation, asking me to help develop digital marketing strategies that would position Rodriguez Construction as a leader in sustainable building practices and innovative design. She'd finally recognized that my expertise in online customer acquisition and brand positioning could help their company reach younger homeowners who were driving much of Austin's residential construction market. The collaboration was successful and profitable for both of us, but it also represented validation that my business skills were applicable across industries in ways that my family was finally beginning to appreciate. The most unexpected development was Marcus asking me to become a limited partner in a commercial real estate investment fund that he was organizing with several of his Goldman Sachs colleagues. The fund would focus on identifying undervalued properties in rapidly growing markets throughout Texas, using exactly the kind of analytical approach that had led to my parking lot success. My role would involve market analysis and strategic planning, contributing the same expertise that had generated my real estate investment success to a much larger scale operation. The partnership with Marcus represented a complete transformation of our sibling relationship, from polite coexistence with underlying competitive tension to genuine professional collaboration based on mutual respect for each other's expertise. He'd come to understand that my unconventional career path had led to exactly the kind of strategic thinking and market analysis capabilities that were essential for successful real estate investment, while I'd gained appreciation for how his financial background and network connections could amplify the impact of sound analytical work. Ashley had developed her own professional relationship with my business, hiring Elevate Digital Marketing Agency to develop a comprehensive online presence for her interior design company. The project was challenging and sophisticated, requiring exactly the kind of strategic thinking and creative problem-solving that had made my company successful with technology sector clients. Ashley's willingness to pay full professional rates for my services, rather than expecting family discounts or casual assistance, demonstrated how completely her understanding of my business expertise had evolved. The collaboration with Ashley was particularly satisfying because it allowed me to demonstrate how digital marketing strategies could transform traditional service businesses. Her interior design company had been successful through referrals and local networking, but my online marketing strategies helped her reach high-end clients throughout Texas and establish her reputation as one of the state's premier designers. The success of our collaboration generated additional referrals within Austin's design and architecture communities, creating new business opportunities for both of us. The extended family's transformation was equally dramatic and professionally valuable. Uncle Miguel had hired my company to develop digital marketing strategies for his auto repair chain, recognizing that online customer acquisition and reputation management were becoming essential for traditional service business. The project was successful enough to generate expansion opportunities throughout South Texas, and Miguel was now actively seeking my advice about business development and investment strategies beyond his original industry focus. Cousin Sophia had become one of my most valuable professional allies, regularly referring financial planning clients who needed digital marketing expertise and seeking my input on technology sector investments that her clients were considering. Our collaboration had evolved into a formal partnership for clients who needed both financial planning and digital marketing services, combining our expertise in ways that provided comprehensive business consulting that neither of us could offer independently. The ripple effects of professional recognition had extended well beyond my immediate family to create opportunities throughout Austin's business community that were transforming my company's growth trajectory. We'd been invited to join the Austin Technology Council and the Central Texas Real Estate Investment Association, organizations that I'd never imagined would recognize digital marketing expertise as relevant to their membership criteria. The invitations reflected growing understanding that strategic thinking and analytical capabilities were transferable across industries in ways that traditional business categories didn't always capture. The speaking opportunities that emerged from this recognition were particularly gratifying, because they allowed me to share insights about strategic thinking and market analysis with audiences that would have dismissed my expertise just a year earlier. I'd recently delivered keynote presentations about digital transformation strategies to the Texas Real Estate Investment Conference and the Austin Business Development Summit, events where my expertise was valued specifically because of the demonstrated connection between digital marketing knowledge and successful real estate investment. The most meaningful speaking engagement came when the University of Texas Business School invited me to deliver a guest lecture about entrepreneurship and strategic thinking. The invitation represented recognition that my career path, which had seemed so unconventional and risky when I'd dropped out of college to start my business, had actually led to exactly the kind of innovative thinking and practical success that business schools were trying to teach their students. The lecture was well received and led to additional opportunities to mentor young entrepreneurs who were trying to build businesses in emerging industries. The mentoring relationships that developed from these speaking engagements were creating another dimension of professional satisfaction that I hadn't anticipated when I'd first started building my business. Young entrepreneurs who were facing the same kind of skepticism and misunderstanding that I'd experienced for years were seeking guidance about how to demonstrate their capabilities to traditional business communities that didn't immediately recognize their expertise. My experience with the parking lot revelation had become a case study in strategic positioning and patient timing that was helping other entrepreneurs navigate similar challenges. The parking lot itself had continued to appreciate in value as East Austin's development accelerated, and I'd recently received an offer from a major developer that was triple what I'd paid for the property. The financial return was impressive, but I'd decided to hold on to the lot for both strategic and sentimental reasons. Strategically, the location was likely to become even more valuable as Austin's growth continued, but sentimentally, the parking lot represented the moment when my family finally understood the scope of my business capability. The decision to keep the parking lot had created additional opportunities to demonstrate my strategic thinking about real estate investment and market time. My family was now actively seeking my advice about when to buy, hold, or sell properties, recognizing that my analytical approach to market evaluation had proven consistently accurate. The conversations about real estate investment strategy were sophisticated and detailed, reflecting their growing understanding of the complexity involved in successful property investment and their respect for my analytical capability. The transformation in family dynamics had extended to holiday gatherings and social events, where conversations about my business were now characterized by genuine interest and respect rather than polite tolerance. Relatives who had spent years asking when I was going to get a real job were now seeking advice about their own business challenges and investment decisions. The shift was evident in everything from seating arrangements at family dinners to the types of questions people asked about my work and future plans. The most satisfying aspect of this transformation was watching family members recognize that their assumptions about unconventional career paths had been limiting their understanding of what constituted valuable business expertise. The parking lot revelation hadn't just demonstrated my capabilities, it had challenged their frameworks for evaluating success and recognizing strategic thinking. The experience had been educational for everyone involved, creating opportunities for growth and understanding that extended well beyond my individual situation. Looking back on the journey from being the family member whose business expertise was politely dismissed to becoming someone whose strategic thinking was actively sought and valued, I realized that the parking lot had served as more than just a successful investment. It had been a bridge between different ways of understanding business success, translating innovative thinking into traditional terms, while demonstrating that expertise developed in emerging industries was often applicable to established business challenges. The wedding day confrontation with Tyler Brooks had been the catalyst for this transformation, but the real foundation had been years of building genuine expertise and strategic thinking capabilities that were valuable regardless of how they were initially perceived by others. The parking lot had provided a moment of dramatic clarity, but the underlying competence had been developing throughout my entire career. The revelation had been satisfying because it was based on substantial achievement rather than empty vindication. As I continued growing Elevate Digital Marketing Agency and expanding my real estate investment portfolio, the lessons from the wedding revelation remained relevant to every aspect of my business development. Strategic thinking, patient timing, and the ability to recognize opportunities that others were overlooking continued to drive both my marketing work and my investment success. The skills were transferable across industries and situations in ways that were creating ongoing opportunities for growth and professional development. The story of the parking lot revelation had become part of my professional identity, but it was also a reminder that sometimes the most powerful way to demonstrate expertise is through results that speak for themselves, rather than arguments or explanations. The parking lot had been more persuasive than any presentation I could have given about my business capabilities, because it represented strategic thinking in action rather than theoretical knowledge. The experience had reinforced my belief that sustainable success comes from building genuine competence rather than just managing perception. The ultimate legacy of the wedding revelation wasn't just personal vindication or professional recognition, but the understanding that expertise can emerge from unconventional paths,
and that strategic thinking is valuable regardless of the industry context where it's applied. The parking lot had become a symbol of these broader principles, representing the potential for innovative thinking to create opportunities that others might not recognize or appreciate, until the results become undeniable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.